Good afternoon, everybody. As she said, my name is Martyn Howarth. I'm the sales director at Melett. I've been at Melett for about 4 years, but I've been in the turbocharger industry pretty much all of my working life. I'm going to talk to you today very briefly about trends that we at Melett are observing in the turbocharger aftermarket. I'm going to talk to you very briefly about Melett. This is not supposed to be a commercial presentation, but I'm not going to lose that opportunity at least. But then really talk a little bit about the general outlook for the turbocharger aftermarket here in Europe. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the observations that we've made during some research that we made talking to garages and their attitude to new turbos versus remanufactured turbos, and try and put some interpretation on those results. I'm going to talk a little bit also about some of the car park variations that we observe in Europe and the impacts that they are having on sales patterns. A little bit also about proliferation of turbocharger models, complexity of turbocharger models, and the intellectual property that we're seeing inside them, and hopefully try and arrive at some conclusions. Just a little bit about the Melett Group. Melett is a British company. We're based in the north of England, where we have our headquarters, but we have operations across the globe. I'll tell you a little bit about those. So we have 8 locations across 4 continents. UK is where the head office is, where we have our main distribution. We have sales, finance, engineering, new product development, technical department, supply chain, and we also have logistics and distribution. The second facility you can see there is our dedicated factory, which is for producing core assemblies. That currently is running almost to capacity on one shift, to the tune of about 240,000 units a year. And finally, we've recently taken on a third facility because of the expansion of our business, which is a goods in and quality inspection warehouse. Quality, of course, being one of our key selling factors. Moving on, the top facility you can see there is our own manufacturing in China. That's 100% Melett owned and controlled, where we make turbine wheels, compressor covers, compressor wheels and bearing housings. We also do testing and metrology there. The second building is we're very proud of our new facility in Poland. We built it from scratch. And it started operation at the end of November last year. And finally, our North American sales and distribution centre. It's based in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's serving the growing North American market. We pride ourselves on our quality. Melett is a precision engineering company, and all our components are engineered in the UK by our in-house team of engineers. We manufacture to ISO 9001 TS 16949 standards, both in our supply base and in our own facilities. Quality inspection is a key part of this, as is control of our suppliers. And it's important to note that all Mellett's turbos and core assemblies are built, balanced and flowed in our facilities in the UK. What do we do? Well, pretty much everything to do with a turbocharger. So if you need a bearing, we'll sell you a bearing, all the way up to a turbocharger and everything in between. So components, repair kits, and core assemblies. Okay, that's my pitch. Let's talk a little bit more about what we're observing in the trends. Let's start off with what the future holds for turbos. There's been a lot of negative press out there about diesels. Are diesels dead? There's talk of eliminating diesels from the city centres in London, in Madrid, in Paris, Mexico City. I'm going to replace my car in 3 or 4 months, and I'm already wondering, do I really want another diesel if I can't drive into central London, for example? So there is a question mark, and obviously if diesels are under threat, then potentially turbochargers are under threat. Or are they? Well, actually, no. Car manufacturers have been aware that there's an increasing cost in and complexity to make diesel engines compliant with emissions regulation. So they've actually been moving away from them for some time, and focusing on developing gasoline engines with things that you already see out there in some cases: variable valve timing, improved fuel injection, cylinder deactivation, downsizing, and of course turbochargers. So, all right, the VW Dieselgate scandal has contributed to all this melee, but diesel was predicted to fall anyway, and it's predicted to fall from around 53% penetration in Europe now to under 35% by 2020. That's the bad news. The good news is that the diesel engines will in most cases be replaced by gasoline engines, and pretty much a lot of those will be turbocharged. So life is still good. We estimate that the aftermarket volumes will continue to grow. Okay, these are kind of random numbers that I just pulled from the internet, and you can sort of, figures show that, for example, the OEM market will increase 40% between now and 2022. A compound annual growth of 6% between now and 2021. Another figure I saw was 42% of light vehicles now are turboed, and that's forecast to reach 62% over the next 10 years. A lot of talk about hybrid engines. Even the hybrid engines are predicted to be turbocharged in most cases, and going up to 56%, up from 18%. And I got those numbers from Borg-Warner. I stole them unashamedly. And okay, we can observe that the volume of turbos for gasoline engines is going to increase. What we're not taking account of here is that we think that gasoline turbos will fail sooner than the diesel variants, primarily because you've got much higher exhaust gas temperatures. So, in conclusion, we can rest easy. Those of us who are involved in the turbo business, I think we can be assured that it will continue to give us growth in the aftermarket for the foreseeable future. Okay, moving on to the market research that we conducted. Now, I have to say that this was limited to the UK, so it's a UK specific snapshot. But we went out and talked to garages, which may sound, that's not exactly revolutionary, but in our line of business we primarily talk to the turbo specialists in the world rather than getting down to the actual end user. And we found interesting that about 50% of them were buying from turbo specialists. They're local turbo specialists. And in the UK we do have a lot of them. They're dotted around all over the place, particularly in the north of England where we are. We call it the Turbo Triangle because Borg-Warner, Honeywell and Cummins Turbo Technologies all have facilities there. So people who leave those businesses tend to set up shops, and there's a lot of them. The other 50% were buying from motor factors or even the OEM dealers in some cases. And so we tried to explore why they were doing that and what was driving it. And I also found that a significant amount of garages really had a strong preference for brand new turbochargers. They didn't want reman. And in fact, they didn't use the word reman. They used the words like, oh, I don't want second hand, I don't want used. And so I thought that was rather interesting, and so we continued to dig into that attitude to try and understand why they were reluctant to use remanufactured turbos. Okay, and this is what we found. Okay, some of them differentiated between vehicles based upon the age profile and the quality of the vehicle. So, for example, in this case, if they've got a late model, 2012, say, BMW 535, the vehicle still has a very high residual value, and therefore they preferred to push a newer unit, and the customer is prepared to pay a little bit more than, say, the traditional culprit of the Peugeot 1.6 HDI, which those of you who are involved in the turbo business know is a turbo killer. It just eats its turbos quite regularly. And so you imagine this poor guy's got a 10-15-year-old Peugeot 206. It's already gone through 2 or 3 turbos. They're not likely to want to pay very much money for a repair solution, so they'd probably go for a reman rather than a new. The other factor that came in was the actual application of the vehicle. So vehicles that work for a living, white van, taxis, you know, these guys rely on the vehicle running to make a living. They're generally prepared to pay a little bit more for a repair solution because they earn their living from it. And this was an interesting one that came up as well. How easy is the turbo to apply, to get it out and get it back in on any given application? And here's a good example. This is actually one of our test vehicles that we used to develop a turbocharger. Mercedes 300e diesel 2009, and you can not quite, well, you can't quite see, but the turbo's just there. It's sat in between the V of the engine. Probably takes 2 to 3 hours to get it out and get it in. So there's not too much risk if it goes wrong for the garage to replace it for his customer. He might take a risk on this one. At the other end of the spectrum, Land Rover Discoveries and particularly Range Rovers around the 2007-8 model years, they're a nightmare. You've got to take the body off to get at the turbocharger. It can take a day to 2 days of labour. So particularly guys repairing the specialists in Land Rovers, they were quite a few of them were, oh, I only use new, because the risk of it not being 100% right first time means that they have to spend 2 or 3 days, even if they get a turbo back on warranty. You see, you understand the point? So that did make a difference as well. The other thing that we found was the variation in quality. What I'm trying to show here is the spread of turbocharger workshops. And of course, they're not all equal. You get the good, the bad and the ugly. I'm not saying who is who here, but there is a variation according to their approach to quality, depending on what type of parts they're using, etc. So the experience of the garage who uses a turbo specialist and his attitude to reman will depend on the quality of the last person he used. So if the last turbo he bought as reman gave him a problem, he's going to be a little bit more reluctant to use it again. The other thing we heard from the garages was that the product is becoming broader. If we look back to 2010, they were pretty much through. This is buying through the motor factors, through distribution. They could buy a new OE turbo at the top price. In the middle, a remanufactured turbo from the factor, or even sometimes repaired turbos were available. Now in 2017, the range of product available is much wider. So you can go from a new OE turbo, they can get remanufactured OEM turbos from Garrett and Borg-Warner, an aftermarket new turbo from Melett, from other suppliers, a remanufactured turbo and a repaired turbo. So a lot more option out there. But when we asked for the feedback on Reman, particularly those who were reluctant to use Reman, you know, our sense is that somebody somewhere had used poor quality parts, maybe poor quality service, and the result is that the garage is reluctant then to deal with Reman. Worse still is if they have a bad experience and they conduct a poor repair, then the whole industry gets damaged. That affects all of us. Just a little word about some of the observations we made around the different markets in Europe, and how they behave rather differently for us. These are new car registrations from 2005 to 2015. Okay? And I've taken a sample of 4 European markets. And maybe some of you know this, but it's kind of quite striking when you see it up here on the screen. So first up, we've got Germany. And Germany, crisis? What crisis? Kind of never happened. They didn't see, as if 2007 never happened to Germany. But neither have they had growth. And actually, when I look at our sales to Germany, it's one of our strongest performing markets. Maybe there's a correlation. If I look at Great Britain, our home market, yep, we had, sorry, this, I should have got the labels on here. This is 2007. So we saw a little dip, but it's come back really strong. And so we've got a fairly healthy population of vehicles that are in our target range. Okay, here comes the contrast. Let's look at Italy. Boom. 2007, down, 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 and it's just barely recovering. You're from the Italian market. You recognise this? Yeah. Okay. What about Spain? Anybody from Spain in the house? No? Spain has the most dramatic impact. So, along to 2007, and volumes have halved. That's really dramatic, and it's never recovered. And if you consider that the Reman sweet spot for applications are between 5 and 10 years, that's where we sell the most product as an industry. And so that generation of vehicles is missing in Spain. It's missing in Italy. It's probably, I haven't got the figures, but it's probably missing in Greece, Portugal. And it's no surprise that where we have an absolutely vicious price fight, the worst one in Europe is probably Spain. Spain is where we're seeing the prices just being driven down and down and down. Now, what happens in Spain doesn't just stay in Spain, because we live in a connected world and we all know the prices across Europe. And so what we're observing is the knife fight to get this business of the older applications. As the average age increases, it means prices are being driven down viciously on the old applications in some markets, and that's having an impact on other markets where it perhaps shouldn't do. And worse still, it's also affecting the price of Reman turbos for newer applications, because people say, well, okay, you're going to charge me €200 for this old Peugeot 1.6 HDI turbo, and it's very similar in size to this turbo that goes on a 4-year-old BMW 120. Why should I pay more? And that is just driving the whole price and quality equation down, and it's of concern to us. Okay, what else is challenging us in the future? Well, new units, funnily enough. If we look at the newer generation of turbochargers, they're becoming, because of emissions legislation, more and more complex, and there's a greater variety of models. So, for example, this is a BMW. I think it's a 4-litre application. You can see things like fabricated turbine housings, again, another one here with a very complex outlet and another fabricated housing. There's not enough volume out there for somebody like Melett or another manufacturer to go and invest in the tooling to make this full range. So nobody could possibly make this full range of turbos, which potentially leaves it in the hands of an OEM monopoly, which is just not good. Another example of complexity is, again, because of emissions, actuation systems have become more sophisticated, more complex, more integrated into the engine management system, and there's also a lot more IP, intellectual property, in this. And these are two examples. So here we have a Heller actuator for a Garrett turbo. Heller have intellectual property in that. Now, we've had to invest quite a lot of money to get around that, to design our way around it, to offer the market a solution. All right. Another example are Borg-Warner BV range of variable nozzle turbochargers. That is also a patented system, and we're looking at ways around that, but it's not easy. It makes the alternative aftermarket's life very, very much harder. So again, what worries me is that we end up with a monopoly on new turbos from the OEM and a reman industry that's driven itself into the ground through pricing, through lower quality parts, and damaged its reputation. And so then where are we? You know, it's a difficult situation. So I don't think anybody in this room wants that scenario to happen. We need to ensure that turbocharger reman remains viable, remains sustainable into the future, having a good reputation, and basically we need to avoid that race to the bottom on price. That's very easy for me to say. You guys all have to face your customers, and you know the price pressure, but what's the solution? What's the conclusion? Well, I don't pretend to have a monopoly on wisdom here, and I think this issue raises more questions than it gives us answers. Certainly, we'd like to see that quality reman space for vehicles in the 3 to 10 year zone remain. Obviously, you've got OEM new turbos in the warranty period, in the early life cycle. We'd like to see that flourishing quality reman segment. And then, okay, for the older stuff, for the cheap stuff, for the very old vehicles, yeah, of course, there's always going to be the cheap and cheerful reman and repair solutions, but we need to try and compartmentalise it into that zone. So what needs to be done? Well, again, I think we need, as businesses, to have the courage to maintain our quality standards, our margins, to ensure that we have sustainable businesses into the future. Education is everything. I mean, this is part of why I'm here today, and Melett is very strong on putting out that message into the market, promoting quality remanufacturing to garages with our What's in Your Turbo campaign, which has been going on for quite some time. I spoke about that last time I was here at REMATEC. But who else is going to do this? You know, the motor factors? I don't think so. Suppliers, some will, some won't. And the turbo specialists, well, you know, I'm looking to this room to try and encourage you to keep that quality message, to keep that quality standard high. As I said, we don't have a monopoly on wisdom, and we'd be really delighted to hear your views on this topic, to hear your opinions. Please feel free. We're here in the hall in the middle, stand 8636. Come by and talk to us. We'd love to engage with you and see what you think about this as well. So on that, I'll conclude. Thank you for your time and attention.